Howdy and welcome to Rob's Retro Reviews. There's a new cowboy game coming out called Red Dead Redemption 2. I've never heard of it, but one thing I know is there's only one cowboy game for me, and that's Lucky Luke on the PS1. The thing is, I've not played this game since I was a kid, and I remember it being a bit rough around the edges even then. So, let's take a look at it now, together, and see if we've found ourselves a hidden gem. Before we take a look at the game itself, I think I should give a bit of background information on what Lucky Luke actually is. It started as a comic book series which was created in Belgium by a cartoonist who is simply known as Morris. The comics first appeared in 1946 and are still being made to this very day, which is actually pretty damn impressive. The series is apparently pretty popular throughout Europe, although I have to say, the only reason I've ever heard of it is because of this PS1 game, so I don't think the source material is very popular in the UK. As with anything popular, Lucky Luke has since appeared in animated TV shows and films, which is what you're watching now, live action films, board games, he's had toys, and of course, is appeared in several video games. The game we're focusing on is the PS1 game simply titled Lucky Luke, and the reason for this is simply because it's the only one I've played. There were games before this one, most notably one on the SNES, which was also just called Lucky Luke. In fact, a hell of a lot of the earlier Lucky Luke games were just called Lucky Luke, so it would have probably been quite confusing for fans to keep up back in the day. One other thing to note is that because Lucky Luke is more popular in Europe than America, a lot of the games weren't actually released in America at all. But the one on PS1 isn't one of them. This one was released all over the world, so you can rejoice in that fact. Anyway, the gist of Lucky Luke is that he's a cowboy who's extremely proficient with guns, and most of the stories involve him taking down villains who are inspired by American history as well as fiction. The main reoccurring bad guys are the Dalton brothers, who are bumbling criminals who always somehow manage to escape from prison and are then recaptured by Luke. With that history lesson out of the way, let's get back to the game and start this review, shall we? After putting the game in, the first thing we're greeted with is this really ominous language select screen. I was under the impression that this was a game for kids about wacky characters taking on a cowboy hero, but this just gives off a really ominous atmosphere. This weird tone could have easily been avoided if the game just had some jolly music over the language select screen rather than this really unsettling wind sound effect. But anyway, enough criticism of the first thing we come across. Let's at least give the game a chance. Whoa, that was unexpected. What the hell is this game going for? We've got unsettling wind sound effects paired with happy-go-lucky trumpets, and the whole thing doesn't mesh together very well for me. The next thing we see is the first cutscene, and this looks pretty good. You can tell it's a bit low budget, but you can also tell the creators cared about what they were doing and were probably pretty big fans of Lucky Luke in general. The story itself is pretty bare bones. Basically, the Daltons escape prison by using dynamite that they inexplicably have access to in the prison cell. Then we cut to a town where Lucky Luke is given a wanted poster by his horse, and he proceeds to try and recapture the Daltons. I suppose my biggest complaint with the story is that we don't actually know what the motivation of the Daltons is. We know that they're criminals, but what have they actually done to be in prison in the first place, and what are they going to do now they're out? We're never told, so they never really stood out to me as being good villains. Despite the cutscene looking pretty swanky, the sound design is a bit, well, it's just a bit off. Like, for example, the noise of the vulture's wings doesn't match how it moves. There's also a really obnoxious sound as we go through the prison bars, which doesn't match the rest of the sound design and sounds more like it's supposed to be a jump scare than an object passing the camera. I don't know, the sound design just feels a bit empty and lacking, and it lowers the overall production value of the cutscene, which is a bit of a shame. The background music is pretty good though. It sounds exactly like what you would expect a Western game to sound like, with lots of harmonica usage. After all of that, we're finally taken to the main menu, so let's give that a bit of an explore, shall we? I have to say that this menu is pretty cool. The way it works is that for each sub-menu you enter, you're taken to a new place in town. So if you click on the password entry screen, we're taken to a wanted poster, which is a nice touch. If we look at the controls, we're taken to the back of a bar. But the best of all is if we look at the sound options, where we're taken inside the bar. You know, one thing I love in older games is when they give you a sound test option where you can listen to all of the music and sound effects used in the game. I always think that's a nice extra detail that rewards you for exploring the menus. A couple of other games that do this are Bubble Bobble and Mickey's Wild Adventure, both on the PS1, but there are bound to be loads more. Lucky Luke also has this sound test feature, but here's the thing, it doesn't work. You select a track you want to listen to and press X and it takes you back to the previous menu. So I tried pressing other buttons, but they either kicked me out of the menu or did nothing. So that's a very weird oversight. Speaking of weird sound problems, this seems to be becoming a problem throughout all of the aspects of this game, because the main menu doesn't have any music at all, and this just creates this really awkward environment. Okay, so here's the thing. Technically, nothing that I say about this game's soundtrack actually matters because the game does in fact have music, and it's just that my particular game disc doesn't play it properly. You might be thinking, why didn't I look into this before and watch some gameplay on YouTube or something, and you'd be right to think that. In fact, that's exactly what I did, and I came across footage of the game that, just like mine, didn't have any music. So at that point, I just assumed the game didn't have music and carried on. However, when I came to look at music to use in the background of this video, I saw this game's soundtrack uploaded to YouTube and gave it a listen, only to find loads of tracks that I hadn't heard in the game itself. So I gave some more gameplay videos a watch and found that the game does in fact have music. Now the mystery is it just a coincidence that my game disc and the game disc of the person who uploaded the first gameplay video that I watched on YouTube have the same problem? Or is it a problem with certain prints of the game where the soundtrack doesn't work properly? It's not like this is even an issue where I can just look it up and get information, because this is a game that wasn't very popular back when it was released, and it's obviously even less popular now. So there's pretty much no information about it online. So this will most likely just remain a mystery. So basically I've decided to keep the parts of this video where I'm complaining about the game's soundtrack intact, because at the end of the day, this review is a breakdown of my own experience with the game, and my experience involved having pretty much no music. Having said that, any parts where I'm complaining about the music specifically, take with a pinch of salt, because it might not be as bad as it seems. Having said that, don't take any of the bits where I'm complaining about the sound effects with a pinch of salt, because they are as bad as they seem. For now though, let's start a segment of the video entitled Appreciating the Soundtrack of Lucky Luke, because I feel it would be unjust to be complaining about it in the video without acknowledging how good it is. So, let's listen to some of my personal highlights. Getting back to the review now, despite the main menu not having any music, the bar area of the menu actually does have some background music, but it's not exactly pleasant to listen to. In fact, it's a little bit weird. What the hell are the people in the background actually doing? It just sounds like they're making nonsensical noises rather than background chitter-chatter. Maybe this was a stylistic thing? I don't know, it's just a bit odd. Anyway, let's talk about the first level. I think it's about time that we dived into the game itself. Lucky Luke is a 2.5D action platformer which has an emphasis on exploration and backtracking through levels to find specific items. For example, here in the first level we come across the door to the sheriff's office but can't open it without first getting a key from the end of the level. And we need to get in there to get dynamite to blow up a stack of boxes which halts our progress later on. Another thing that separates this from most other platformers is that the 2.5D aspect of the game is actually quite heavily utilised. You'll find yourself moving into the foreground and background quite a lot, and sometimes even having to shoot objects in the distance too. This is actually a really good element of the game, and it stops it from feeling too flat and uninteresting. I like it a lot, and it's a common theme throughout the whole game. Of course, this 3-dimensional movement is case sensitive, and you can only do it when there's a ladder or a door in the background, so it's not like it's a fully 3D game. But it almost feels like you have a lot more freedom to explore by incorporating this into it. It's like Tombi, or Tomba for you Americans out there, or Disney's action game featuring Hercules. Yes, that's the full title of the Hercules game on PS1, which both do this same thing with depth in a 2D game. There's a bit of a variety in enemies, with some simply just being shot at like in any other game, but some others having to be taken down indirectly by having you shoot a metallic object to ricochet your bullet off of to get them when they're in cover. It's actually pretty cool stuff. There's also some interactivity with the game's environments too, with certain parts having you shoot a hanging box to make it crash to the floor and clear your way forward, and stuff like that. I'm really surprised with how original this game is so far. I was expecting just a run-of-the-mill cash grab platformer, but what we have actually has some interesting ideas that are fairly well implemented. Maybe this time we've actually found a hidden gem. It's not all good news though, and I do have a couple of complaints. My primary issue is the sound design, which is a little bit lacking, and it ranges from sounding like stock effects to being outright weird. Like, why do the dollar collectibles make these sound effects? Another issue is that the camera is a little bit disorientating because of how it swings left and right whenever you move left or right in the level. This is obviously a good thing for backtracking, because if the camera was just locked to have Luke always being on the left of the screen, you wouldn't be able to see anything when you go backwards. But it does become an issue when you quickly jump to the left to avoid a projectile or something, because as soon as you move slightly backwards, the camera starts moving, and then when you turn to face the right of the screen again, the camera will sway in that direction too, causing this constant camera movement, which looks very unappealing. Perhaps they should have made it so the camera takes a couple of seconds to start moving its position when you turn around. As it is, it just looks a bit awkward at times. The default controller layout is also a bit strange. X is run, square is jump, circle is shoot, and triangle uses dynamite. It's not explicitly bad, but it's just not like any other game I've ever played. I did adapt to this though, and of course the option is there to change the layout too, so it's not really a problem at all, just something I thought I would point out. It's at this point where it starts to introduce a variety of gameplay styles to us, starting with the first boss fight. It took me a while to realise what the hell I was supposed to be doing here, but after a while of awkwardly flailing around, I noticed that I was supposed to be hitting these logs back at the boss with the frying pan I was holding. The problem here is that it's super awkward to use the frying pan. It's like rather than a smooth hitting motion, Luke's arms just snap into set positions, and it makes timing the hits really difficult. Luckily, I noticed you could cheese the boss by just standing on the very left of the stage where he can't actually hit you, so I had a lot of time to practice hitting the logs back at him. Then we enter the first bonus level, which throws yet another gameplay style at us. It almost feels like it's supposed to be a light gun game where you shoot different coloured bottles flying out from behind a bar to earn different amounts of money. This is a pretty cool bonus area, but it doesn't actually tell you what the hell you're supposed to be doing, so I was a bit confused at first as to whether I was supposed to be shooting the mirrors in the background, or the bartender, or the bottles. But I got what the objective was in the end. A bit of text explaining what I was supposed to be doing might have been a nice touch though. In terms of how this controls, rather than using a light gun, which would have made this way better, you use the D-pad to move a cursor around the screen and then simply press the shoot button when a bottle crosses the cursor. Simple. What's that here? The sound of people asking why they should bother to collect the dollar signs found in the normal levels and bonus levels? Well, allow me to explain. The dollars you collect are used at the end of each section of the game to either buy a password or to buy extra lives. So if you're feeling confident, you can just spend it on all the extra lives because you know you aren't going to die at this stage of the game. Or if you're a bit worried you might get a game over, it might be best to buy a password which will effectively allow you to save your game. It's a bit disappointing the game doesn't have memory card saving, but the passwords are short and easy to keep noted down, so it's not too bad. Also, if you do happen to get a game over, you can actually just press Start Game on the main menu and it will take you to the last level you got the password for. So the only need to ever enter a password will be if you turn the game off and continue at a later time. Also, I very much like the noises that this guy makes. It's really random and makes no sense, but I love it. He also changes the speed of the noise if you hover over the password option. It's great stuff. Suddenly the game has a narrator, and this really threw me off when I first heard it. Not only do we now have an in-game cutscene rather than an FMV, but we also have a narrator that literally hasn't been here until now. Why wasn't this guy here during the opening cutscene? He could have explained to us who the Daltons were and given us a bit of context, but no, he just suddenly pops out of nowhere after I feel like we're well into the game.
Lucky Luke and Jolly Jumper are quietly trotting along when they see a man in the distance who is tied up.
The second level keeps up with throwing variety at us by giving us a train chase sequence where Luke is riding his horse after a train that's been taken over by the Daltons and the henchmen. The first section of this level involves simply catching up to the train, and it's a sort of almost top-down angle where you need to jump, move left, right, forward and backwards to avoid incoming rocks and fences. After catching up with the train, the camera will shift positions to be at the side of Luke looking at the train, and this is where the level turns into more of a full-on shooter. You'll have to shoot into the background where the train is to hit all of the enemies, while also avoiding their shots and dynamite sticks to throw at you, all while paying attention to the foreground in case you need to jump over obstacles. Eventually you catch up with the front of the train and the level ends. I have to say the premise for this level and the way it's executed is actually really damn cool. I love how the camera changes in the second half of the level and the gameplay completely switches up. It actually feels really dynamic and I'm very impressed. Another positive is that this level actually has background music. I know, shocking. It's pretty good as well and gets you in the mood for the chase. It's a little bit quiet though for some reason. A bit of an issue is that in the shooting section I could never really tell where my bullets were going. Sometimes it felt like I had to position myself straight on with the enemies, but then other times that didn't work and I had to be slightly ahead or behind to hit them. It's a bit inconsistent and made the level a lot harder than it should have been. There are quite a few checkpoints though, so it doesn't really matter all too much if you die. I've not really spoken about the game's graphics yet, and the reason for this is because I'm actually a bit divided on them. The style of it is obviously supposed to reflect the comics, which is why everything looks sort of warped and handcrafted. The more I play the game, the more I like it, so it's not that it's bad. I think it's just unlike anything I've ever played before, so I kinda need to adapt to it. It definitely gets points for originality. After this level, we get another bonus, which this time is an arm wrestle against Luke's horse. This is literally just a button mashing game, but it's not too bad to be in here as a bonus, and plus it is quite funny seeing a man arm wrestle a horse. So then we get to the third level, which is a continuation of the last level, but this time we've boarded the train and we've got to rescue the hostages inside of the carriages. This level goes back to being a 2.5D platformer, which I'm glad about because they need this standard gameplay style to really tie all these other styles together. We start the level on the roof of the train and the basic objective is to find sticks of dynamite, blow holes in the carriage roofs, and then drop in and shoot all of the criminals, thus rescuing everyone. Again, this is a really good premise for a level, and it feels really action-packed with the enemies suddenly appearing behind you and sometimes catching you off guard by hiding. It's such a typical scene for a Western film to have, but when you're actually playing it like this, it's a really cool throwback. There's also a couple of boss sections sprinkled into the level to add some more variety, where you have to shoot bombs back at one of the Daltons after he's thrown one at you. It's pretty easy, although the second phase does get a little bit harder because there's another enemy throwing exploding bottles at you. One of the visual quirks that I'm not too sure about is how some of the enemies and NPCs are 2D, while some other enemies and NPCs are fully 3D models. It isn't really a big issue, but it's a bit off-putting when there's a mix of the 2D sprites and 3D models next to each other. I get that the game didn't have a huge budget, but it's just a bit weird to see. It's in this level where we come across the human-sounding dollar signs again too, which is just as disturbing as it was back in the first level. After finishing this level, I got another bonus, and it's completely different to the first and second bonus levels, so that's pretty damn cool that every level has its own bonus minigame. It makes you actually want to collect all of the floating B letters in every level just to see what new minigame you unlock. It's an awesome incentive to get the collectibles. This particular bonus level is a card game where you have to find the cards with either Luke, Luke's horse, or the jail guard dog's face on them. The more of these cards you find in a row, the more money you'll win, but the catch is that there's a Dalton card in the mix, and if you uncover that one, you'll lose all of your winnings. So it's a game of risk versus reward, where you could keep going to win bigger money, but the longer you stay in the game, the more likely it is that you'll uncover the Dalton card. It's actually a really good card game, and you could even play this in real life. So yeah, I give this bonus level a thumbs up. It's something a bit different, and it fits with the whole cowboy theme going on. So far, this game has actually been really good. Like, it's got some interesting mechanics and ideas that are fairly well executed, and at this point I would 100% say that this is a hidden gem. The thing is, this is where it goes downhill. The next level is set in a castle in the middle of the desert, and just listen to this goddamn music. Seriously, I know I've been questioning this a lot, but what tone is this game going for? It has elements of comedy while being an action game, but then there's also aspects of it like the main menu, language select screen, and now this, where it almost seems like it's supposed to be scary. It's just a bit all over the place. This is where the game becomes a bit convoluted in terms of its level design too. The idea is that you have to navigate your way around this castle by going up and down floors using ladders and by going through doors that teleport you to different areas. The actual objective is to find 10 magic pearls that are scattered throughout the level, and as you can imagine with the complicated layout, this is not an easy task. You know what makes it a billion times harder though? The fact that you have to get each of these pearls in a really specific order. You can't just come across a pearl and collect it as simply as that, because there's only one that's a solid object at any one time. This means you'll have to backtrack through the level to get pearls that you've already come across before, and do this again and again. It just feels like they were trying to artificially lengthen the game at this point, and to be frank, it's crap. There's no map, so I found myself constantly getting lost, and the whole thing was just a massive headache. The annoying sound effects didn't help here either. Not only do the bouncing and door teleporting noises become obnoxious after a while, but the stupid noise that the invisible pearls make when you try to collect them is really, really grating.
No, no, no. No, no, no. No, no, no.
Why the hell did they make the pearls talk like this? Sure, it's funny at first, but it gets really annoying.
No, no, no. No, no, no.
Anyway, after quite a few game overs while trying to do this level, I eventually figured out that you can follow the dog in the foreground who takes you to each of the pearls in the order they need to be collected. That would have been a nice thing for the game to tell me at the start of the level, don't you think? I just had a bad experience with this level generally, and I don't think the open level structure works in this game when it's implemented to this extent. Also, you know how I mentioned that this level was creepy because of the music, and it's even got ghosts to add to this vibe? Well, then we're completely thrown out of this tone by having goddamn circus music play whenever the dog has to balance across a narrow ledge. Seriously, what the hell is this game going for here? Anyway, you'll be happy to know that it's at this point where the game starts to use this level structure in all of the next stages. So that's good for me and my sanity, isn't it? Alright, so this level's set in a mine, and yet again, there's no music. The sound effects are really harsh as well, like something out of a horror game. Give it a listen. And now have a listen to that over some footage of Silent Hill. You'd never know that the sound here is taken from a goddamn cowboy game, would you? The objective here is to work your way to the top of the mine shaft by using these moving platforms that are activated with hidden switches. It has the same sort of non-linear open structure as the previous level, but to be honest, it's nowhere near as bad. There's really only ever one or two ways to go at a time, so this stops it from getting too confusing. This is where the platforming element comes to the forefront of the game, and because this is the first time you've had to make precise jumps, it brings attention to the fact that the jumping controls actually aren't that good. You'll find yourself slipping off of platforms and struggling to make simple jumps that in any other game would be easy. I think the problem is that Luke generally feels a little bit heavy, but then when he's jumping, he floats a lot more than expected, making his jump distance a bit hard to predict. But after some perseverance, I finally finished the level and got to the next boss. And then I died on the boss because I didn't know what the hell I was doing, which meant that I then had to do the entire mine level all over again. So after going through all of that all over again, I got to the boss again, but this time with more lives, so I could actually work out what was going on. Despite it being a bit unobvious as to how you damage him at first, this is actually a really good idea for a boss battle, and it shows that the developers still had good ideas even this far into the game. Basically, you have to avoid these hydraulic presses by always running in the direction of the conveyor belt that you're standing on. But you also need to pay attention to these weird water bottle things that appear randomly on the conveyor belt too. Because to damage the boss, who's in a machine in the background, you have to step on these water bottles and squirt the liquid at him. It's a bit convoluted at first and might take a while to figure that out, but it's actually pretty easy when you do figure it out. It just could have done with maybe a little bit more signposting to tell you what you're doing. The next level is another maze-like collecting stage where you're in the desert and you have to find 4 totem pole segments to give to the witch doctor. Again, this isn't quite as bad as the pearl collecting level because it's not quite as non-linear as that. Here you basically have to either go left at the start or right at the start, and if you're thorough enough, you won't have too much of a problem. The main gimmick of this level is that Luke will experience mirages which affect the level's colours and also make some really weird enemies appear too. The best one being this vulture with a human head. Whoa. The next level throws yet another gameplay style at us. This time it's almost turned into a fighting game where you move on a 2D plane and have a block and hit button. The premise here is that you're trying to get information on the Daltons' whereabouts from another criminal who frequents a nearby bar. So Luke just busts in and starts beating everyone up looking for answers. He's quite a brutal man, really. After beating one opponent, you'll then face another, and then finally fight the person with the information you need. So you'll need to survive all 3 fights to actually progress through this level. There's a block button and a hit button, and you can also do low hits and low blocks by pressing down on the D-pad while attacking or defending. You aren't actually told any of this and you're expected to just figure it out, which is a bit bad considering you're literally just thrown into the level without any kind of experience of this kind of gameplay before. But I got the hang of it pretty quick. I have to admit though, I did feel a bit like I was just button mashing, and it felt really goddamn clunky to land punches. Also, the enemies seemed capable of teleporting towards you at times, which threw me off quite often. But I still managed to do it. The next level is the last of the standard 2.5D levels, and it's probably the second worst one. It's another really open level, but because it's not quite as convoluted as the Pearl level, it gets away with not being named the worst platforming level in the game. Instead of looking for pearls, you're looking for a man's gold which was stolen from him. The only problem being, you're not told how much gold he lost, so you have no idea when you've collected everything. I finished the level by collecting 4 pieces of gold, so I guess there's 4 in the level? Or maybe you can collect more to get some sort of bonus, I have no idea. I guess the main gimmick here was using these hamster wheels to interact with platforms found in other sections of the level. But other than that, it's fairly basic. There is this one enemy who doesn't disappear when you've shot him though, so let's do the honourable thing and do gun tricks over his unconscious body. The next level is... wait a minute. I feel like I've seen this somewhere before. Oh no. Not that again. Yep, Lucky Luke has one of these goddamn minecart levels, and yes, it's by far the worst level in the entire game. The premise is that you need to get to the end of the track and loop around, going through the whole level again but backwards, and then get to where you started the level but facing the other way. And then that's it. So if Luke was just leaving the mine through the way he came in anyway, why the hell did he even bother going in there? You can never tell where the hell you are in the level because everything looks the same. If you miss a lever to split the track in another direction, you have to repeat the same bits of level over and over again to get back to the lever. There's sometimes a warning that there's a gap in the track that you need to jump over, and there's sometimes not. It's extremely long and boring, and this fact is made even worse because there's only one single checkpoint in the whole level. This level is atrocious, like seriously atrocious. You die after a single mistake, and if you get a game over, you'll need to do the whole thing all over again. I literally got 5 game overs on this one level, and by the end of it I was just so let down by the whole game. The first few levels showed some serious promise, but then after that one level where you collect the pearls, everything just went downhill at such a fast rate. Like, what even happened? The developers are clearly capable, so for there to be such a decrease in quality is just such a disappointment. This game went from being a hidden gem to being quite rubbish, and after the amazing start the game had, I just didn't expect it. Anyway, the game isn't over yet, so let's carry on and get this done with. So do you remember way earlier in the game where I mentioned an arm wrestle bonus level with Luke's horse, where it was just a button mashing game? Well, guess what? That concept has now been taken and used as an actual full-on level where you're proving your worth to a random lumberjack. You literally just mash the face buttons on the controller and you win and the level ends. Does this really warrant being a full-on level? It's like they were really running out of steam at this point. But then it gets even worse, because guess what the next level is? Another button mashing game. It's literally identical to the last level apart from with a different background. Literally nothing is different. It's no harder or anything. That's 2 button mashing games in a row that are supposed to be full-on levels. I was okay with it as a bonus level because it was just a stupid minigame. But here they're using it as not only 1 full level but 2 full levels which are back to back. The next level goes back to the fighting gameplay from earlier, but this time you're fighting the lumberjack. There's only the one enemy this time, so it's quite a lot easier, and I had absolutely no trouble with taking him down. It still felt just as clunky as before, and I really wouldn't describe it as fun, but still, at least this lumberjack section is over now. Here's the thing though, because you don't get any money from doing these lumberjack levels, I couldn't afford to get a password for this level. So, if I die, I'll need to do the button mashing levels and that fighting level all over again. That's just stupid. They should have given you enough money to afford a password after doing the fighting section. Forcing players to repeat that section of the game all over again is a sin. So this next level is basically an upgraded version of the bottle shooting minigame from earlier, but this time you're shooting bad guys and they'll shoot you back. It's a lot more dynamic too, having you constantly change locations and having the bad guys pop up in different positions, so you really need to be on the ball. Just like the bottle shooting though, this would have worked so much better with an actual light gun, and I actually think a full-on light gun Lucky Luke game might have been really cool. As far as I'm aware, there were no cowboy light gun games on the PS1, and that's a bit weird considering how obvious of an idea that seems. You could have done a bar shootout, a train chase, a mine shootout, stopping a bank robbery, and loads more. It would have been amazing if it was done well. It's a shame that never happened. After that level, we're finally at the end of the game, the final boss. So, let's see if this game ends on a high, or if it ends drowning in a puddle of its own filth. Like some of the other bosses, it's not instantly clear what you need to do. I was thinking you had to simply shoot the Dalton at first, and then I was thinking you had to shoot the bombs he's throwing back at him, like you did earlier in the game. But what you actually need to do is shoot the hay that's being transported in the middle section of the level to fly into the background where the Dalton is and hit him. The longer the boss goes on, the more bombs the Dalton will throw at you, and these bombs destroy the platforms for you to stand on, making it more difficult for you to position yourself properly to hit him with hay. It's actually a really good boss, and the thing I like about it a lot is that it uses the 2.5D aspect of the game extremely well, basically having 3 layers that you need to keep your eye on. So even though the game got a lot worse as it went on, at least the last 2 levels aren't too bad, so we can be thankful for that. I'm giving Lucky Luke on the PS1 a 4 out of 10. Despite having a lot of really interesting ideas, such as the implementation of 2.5D and the variety in gameplay styles, I feel like it's just very hit and miss, and it misses a lot more than it hits. The first few levels up until the pearl collecting level are seriously good, and if the whole game had been of that calibre, the game would have had a much higher score, and I would be saying that this is 100% an overlooked gem. But instead, I've left the game more focused on the negatives. Some interesting mechanics like shooting the environment to hit enemies behind cover and solve basic puzzles are largely absent or underutilised in the later levels. The sound design shifts in tone far too much, the controls when doing precise platforming just aren't good enough, the fighting gameplay is clunky and appears slightly glitchy at times, the button mashing levels are uninteresting and uninspired, the minecart level is abysmally bad, and the more non-linear platforming levels can be incredibly irritating because of the lack of any direction at all. It's just such a shame because I feel like the game does have some truly positive points. For example, the visual style, while not everybody's cup of tea, did grow on me as the game went on, and that train robbery sequence right at the start of the game was actually really good to play. It's a damn shame. However, there is hope on the horizon because there was a second Lucky Luke game released on PS1 called Western Fever. Now, I don't actually know anything about this one because I never played it even as a kid, and I only recently even learned that it existed. So, join me next time in this mini Lucky Luke PS1 marathon. We'll be taking a look at the second and last game released on the system. Thanks for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, leave a comment letting me know what you thought, and maybe subscribe for more content coming soon. Also, if you're feeling extra generous, click the notification bell so that you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. And until next time, bye!